We're going to talk a lot about some uncomfortable topics on today's podcast.
We should have put it.
We're gonna put that disclaimer at the front.
Definitely going to have to put a disclaimer. But hey, it's the Bible.
We're just talking about the Bible,
We're
man.
just talking about the Bible. It is not PG.
No.
That's for sure.
Welcome to Cross Connections, Season 2, Cover to Cover, as we read along with you each week and discuss the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. Cover to Cover is hosted by
Rick Morley,
Elliot Van Hoy,
and Natalie Hill. Join us as we discover how these stories connect us to God, to our inner selves, and to one another in a world that tries so hard to disconnect us. Welcome back, Cross Connectors. We are here with episode 48. Here we are in Hosea and Joel.
Yeah, we're going to
this
start
week.
going through them quick now because they're pretty much all short books from here until we get to the book of Acts.
These were shorter ones. And next week you'll get a whole slew of short little minor prophets that we're going to talk about all together. But this week we're in a Hosea and Joel. Everyone's
favorite book is Hosea. That's what everyone says, right?
I was going to say, when you say everyone, you mean nobody, right? No, I know that you say you found some redeeming qualities to this book, but it does not land well if you're gonna read it just straight up. You're gonna read it raw, no notes, no listening to cross connections first.
You'd be like, "What is going on here?"
Yeah. It's a rough one.
Kind of good news. We're not in the Babylonian captivity really at all this week. We don't have to talk about that at all. We're talking about a different terrible event that happened.
Yeah, we've actually just gone backwards. Last week in Daniel, we went forward to a new captivity.
Yeah.
And now in Hosea, we're actually going backwards again to an older captivity than the Babylonian one.
Yeah. I mean, it's still a terrible event, but it's a different terrible event.
Right.
We don't have to keep talking about Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon. Hosea is a northern kingdom prophet, kingdom of Israel, and he is foretelling the fall of the northern kingdom at the hands of the Assyrians, which happens in 722 BC.
So we're going all the way back.
We're going back, baby.
We're going way, way back.
In fact, Hosea is arguably the oldest prophet, right there with Isaiah and Amos. So ironically, with the way our Christian Bibles are laid out, we've kind of jumped all over the chronological timeline. But this is back all the way to when we started the prophets with Isaiah, who prophesied in Judah, the southern kingdom, under King Uzziah was one of the kings he prophesied under. And you'll notice right at the start of Hosea, that is the king that is named. Uzziah is named right after Hosea. Hosea, son of Beeri, in the days of King Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah of Judah.
The prophet that I think of when I think of the northern kingdom is, there's Elijah and Elisha. They don't get their own books. How did Hosea
They really didn't. I guess they just didn't. No one wrote their stuff down long form.
Right.
It's very interesting to me. Because I'd forgotten we were going to be getting to these later ones, and I hadn't looked ahead to see when these ones took place. So I just assumed that, the prophets to the northern kingdom didn't get their own because, the northern kingdom fell and the southern kingdom remained, and those were the prophets who got focused on.
I mean, prophecy was
get here, and I'm wrong.
Was pretty much a verbal thing, right? And then there are some prophets that use technology. The technology of writing. And so they turn what they've done orally into something verbal, and it lives on as books. But not all prophets used that new technology of writing and copying and handing things around.
Weird to think of writing as a new technology.
I know, right? Well, there's a whole thing about books and the changing, when humans went from scrolls to books that are called ancient books are called codexes. That's all of a sudden you can flip through something instead of rolling something out. All of this, it's technology. Hosea was the ancient version of a podcaster, right? Because he's using the technology of the day to spread his message.
I am no expert on dating of writing in the ancient Near East, but from a little bit of research, it seems to be the case that Amos and Hosea really are the first around the time that writing is really beginning in an extensive format around the 9th century BC.
So they're cutting edge technology prophets.
Yep. Wow.
Right.
And
And then
Cutting edge.
and then to read Hosea and think that there's something cutting edge about him.
Yeah. So should we get to his
Is there any
message?
other context about Hosea that readers should know before we head into? I think that's probably
You don't know a lot of autobiographical information about Hosea?
We know all the names of his kids.
Yep, we sure do.
We'll get to that.
Talk about
His
bad parenting.
Poor children.
But yeah, I don't think there's
All right.
too much historical context necessary.
As I was, reading again and going back into my commentaries in preparation, there's a thing called a covenant lawsuit. It's a thing. It was an ancient form. And so if somebody, covenants weren't just with the divine, you made a covenant with your neighbor or something like that. There's a whole way about how you make the covenant but then some people would break the covenant. And so you could go to a judge with that broken covenant and get a ruling. And so covenant lawsuits began with a summons of the accused and witnesses that saw it. They summons them all to court. Then there's a statement of charges that were levied against the person who was being charged with breaking the covenant. Then all the evidence was presented, and then there was a verdict that was given. And all 4 of those segments are found in the book of Hosea. And so some people think that Hosea was modeled after a covenant lawsuit.
That is fascinating. And it sounds, I haven't been in too many courtrooms, but it sounds fairly similar to the way that we adjudicate things today.
Yeah, pretty much.
So interesting. I was thinking about how back in the early texts, Deuteronomy, Numbers, when they were laying out how you do certain things, how to set up the way of the people, that there were some rules around who you brought things to and in what order, and you trying to resolve disputes. I can't recall from way back in the spring if it went into that specific detail on how to do a covenant lawsuit, but we probably also didn't focus a ton of our attention on it at that point in time.
Yeah. What might make this covenant lawsuit unique is that God is bringing the covenant lawsuit.
Yes, this is not between peoples, it's between God and the people.
Yeah, that does remind me of important historical context that comes up in this book in terms of what the people have done wrong according to both God and Hosea. And we've talked a lot about the Babylonians. We've talked a lot about the Greeks now with Daniel. But we might have forgotten that the land the Israelites came into was occupied by the Canaanites. The chief god of the Canaanite pantheon was Baal, and Baal is the storm god. And so one of the things that people are doing in the northern kingdom in this period is worshiping Baal alongside of Yahweh. And that is really important to know. This is the main critique that's being leveled against the people of Israel. I think in terms of the worship of Baal, one of the really important things to understand is that some scholars think there was a fertility cult associated with Baal. Let me grab this because this is a very wonderful,
being another book.
Yeah, this is a wonderful commentary of the Old Testament called the Woman's Bible Commentary. And in this
which was edited by my Old Testament professor.
That's right. Carol Newsom, right?
Yep.
Wow.
Hardest A I ever earned. Seriously. Wow.
Oh,
I'm impressed.
You should be. She didn't give A's.
One thing to know about this period is that in the Canaanite mythology, Baal would die during the period of May to September. And this was an explanation for the arid summer weather. And then what would happen is in October, Baal's sister, who was also his lover, Anat, would bring Baal back to life. Baal had been killed by Mot, the god of barrenness and desert, so aridness of summer. Mm-hmm. And in the mythology, part of the way Baal would be brought back to life in October was through this sacred marriage to Anat, which would involve sexual intercourse. And so what happens from the mythology down to the ritual on the actual human level, some scholars think there were cultic sexual activities that would take place in October to celebrate on the human plane the rains coming in October. And so the reason I'm saying that's really important is throughout Hosea, we see this accusation on Hosea's part and God's part that the people of Israel are engaging in these types of fertility practices with cultic prostitutes. And so that's just important to know because I think it sheds some light on the marriage metaphor that's used throughout Hosea. Is that part of where this metaphor could have arisen from? And the really explicit focus on this metaphor as being like sexual, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the metaphor, I'm curious what your translation has, Rick. In the NRSV, it uses the word whoredom a lot. My understanding is a better translation of the Hebrew is promiscuity. So the idea that they're doing this could have been rooted in the reality that they literally were taking place in these cultic rituals that involved sex. So that's a lot. We're going to talk a lot about some uncomfortable topics on today's podcast.
We should have put it.
We're gonna put that disclaimer at the front.
Definitely going to have to put a disclaimer. But hey, it's the Bible.
We're just talking about the Bible,
We're just
man.
talking about the Bible. It is not PG.
No.
That's for sure.
And you don't see this book reflected in children's Bibles for good reason.
For a really good reason. Yeah. We've kind of been talking around like what the thing of the book is.
Yeah.
Should we just
Yeah, so let's launch into
Israel's being called to account
right.
for their syncretistic worshiping practices.
Their promiscuity, in the words of Hosea.
Promiscuity in a worship sense.
Yep.
Like worship.
It jumps right into
Right into it. The
some-
second.
What is this? Are we calling this a sign act?
It is like a sign act. There's question about whether this is referencing an actual historical person that has an actual historical relationship like this, or whether it is just like a parable. We don't know. But in the second verse, God explicitly comes to Hosea and says, go get yourself a woman of promiscuity. What is?
Yeah, woman of promiscuity.
Yeah.
The NRSV translates it a wife of whoredom.
My translation.
As though she's married
Yeah.
to being a whore.
Yeah.
That's
Mine says, go get yourself a whorish woman and whorish children because the country is really whoring away from Yahweh. So in verse 3, so he went and got Gomer, his wife, who is a prostitute.
So interestingly,
I mean, we're at verse 3 at this point.
Well, yeah,
this is
jumped right in.
the interesting challenge of translation, because as far as I understand it, reading the commentary on Hosea, the Hebrew word prostitute is never used for Gomer.
Oh, interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
Okay.
I was reading this just today, and this is why the challenge of translating it whoredom is difficult. The Hebrew noun for prostitute, zonah, is not used in Hosea.
So I did wonder, who is this person that he picked? There's not a lot of information besides Gomer, daughter of Diblaim. And I don't think my information really my notes don't really make it clear whether there's anything about her name or her parents' name that indicates who she is. I'm assuming that this is a fellow Israelite, but they're in a land where there's mixed heritage. So is she non-Israelite? There's really very little here. We're making the assumption of her promiscuity and her whoredom from what God asks Hosea to do, and then he goes ahead and does.
Yeah.
But it does not necessarily indicate that that's who she is. So he marries her one way or another, and immediately they conceive a child, which conceive and bear a son, who Hosea then gives an awful, unloving name to.
So the first name is Jezreel, which importantly is connected to the story way back from 1 Kings of Naboth. And when Naboth is killed by Ahab, the place he is killed is Jezreel.
Oh.
So all the way back to Ahab. If you remember in 1 Kings, this is one of the worst kings of the northern kingdom of Israel. And so part of the sign act here of naming his son Jezreel is God saying in verse 4, I will punish the house of Jehu for the blood of Jezreel, which is the killing of Naboth done by Ahab on behalf of his wife Jezebel. Confusing J's there. And I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel, God says.
The next child is, I don't have the actual Hebrew transliteration here. I just have not compassioned. Like do you have a transliteration?
Yeah, lo ruhama,
which means,
as it translates it here is, I will not have pity, or not pitied.
In the verse 6, I will call him not compassion, because I shall no more have compassion on Israel's household, that I should carry them. But then in verse 7, but on Judah's household, I will have compassion. So we're starting to see the tension between the two nations, and
Right.
that this book is set up really as a judgment against the northern kingdom.
What's interesting is so you and I, Elliot, have very similar study Bibles. Mine's a little bit older, and in mine it translates lo ruhama as not loved.
Whoa.
Could you imagine
Wow.
naming your daughter, your first daughter, naming her not loved?
Yeah. Yep.
Wow. Well, the next, in verse 9, the next child comes along. And again, I don't have a transliteration, but the translation of the name is not my people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no kin of mine.
Yeah. Lo Ami.
He says, name him not my people because you're not my people, and I shall not be God to you, which is the exact opposite of what the verbiage usually is in the Bible. I will be your God and you'll be my people. Here, he's like, nope, we're done.
There's a note in my study Bible that says, I am not your God can also be read, I am not, I am. And if you think back to Moses and being told, I am that I am, God is now saying, I am not, I am.
That is wild.
Isn't that wild?
That is wild.
I am not, I am for you.
Yeah, for you,
Yeah.
basically. Yeah.
Like this intimacy of the divine name is being withdrawn from the people.
And so this relationship between Hosea and Gomer is meant to evoke the relationship between Israel and God. And the whole family is getting in on this. Like the whole family becomes a sign act with their names and with their relationship.
What's really fascinating is the sign act shifts dramatically, very quickly, without much explanation, right at the end of chapter 1 into chapter 2. Right after what we were just reading from about these three children's names, verse 10 says, yet the number of the people of Israel shall be like the sand of the sea. So really interesting in saying, like, you're not my people, I will not have pity on you. And then there's this yet, and it goes on to say, in the place where it is said of them, you are not my people, it shall be said to them, children of the living God. And so immediately with the judgment of the naming of the children, there is this promise that the judgment will not be forever.
Be forever.
And with no explanation whatsoever, you get to chapter 2, and it just says, say to your brother Ami and to your sister Ruma. So it's taking that not, the transliteration in English being the lo, and it's saying, say to your brother, my people, and to your sister, compassion. And there's no explanation, but it's immediately taken away, which is just a fascinating textual note. I think there's a lot you could say there.
In Isaiah and Ezekiel, maybe even Jeremiah, we have chapters of harsh condemnation and judgment, and then there are chapters of hope and restoration, but they're separated. Like, you have huge sections of judgment and then a huge section of hope. Here it's like a couple verses later.
Yeah.
Well, and there's also this hope for the reunification, right? So this is Hosea being set in the northern kingdom of Israel versus the southern kingdom of Judah. The verses right after that in 11, it's talking about the reunification of Israel and Judah.
Yeah.
Which is also interesting considering that we're coming out of, Ezekiel and Daniel after the Babylonian exile, sort of in the promise that there will be one unified again, or the hope of that.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Can I give my positive spin on this?
Please.
Yeah, I was going to say, because then
ready for that?
it gets into all of these, it's all the accusation part, right?
Right.
Here? Yeah.
Again, we don't put this in children's Bibles. I'm sure we're not doing this in the children's sermons, right? Like Vacation Bible School.
Wait, you haven't been teaching Hosea in the children's sermons?
Family service.
It's in the lectionary, man. I've been teaching it.
Next month, we're going to be doing a deep dive in the family service on Hosea. Yet, and I've said this before, like when the adultery metaphor comes up between people and God, that behind that is the metaphor of marriage, first of all, like that what God wanted was this close, intimate, committed relationship with us.
Right.
And there's a beauty to that. There in Hosea, there's also this picture of God is not a God that is, off a million miles away. It's not this is not the distant storm God who like fell asleep and like, we got to wake him up and come back. This is a God who wanted to be close and who was scorned and is really upset about it. Right. And if we've ever been scorned in a friendship or a relationship, we know that really hurts. And so you see God here is a vulnerable God who opened himself up with love to be hurt and was hurt. Yes, the adultery, the whoredom, and all of that is like hard on our ears. But I think if you just go one layer back, that there is some beauty.
Yeah.
I mean, not the nicest picture though of you get kind of an angry, ugly God to some degree in it as well though. I mean, it's not the person who's scorned and is just sad about it.
No,
right?
It's no wilting flower.
Right.
No.
So here's my one challenge with what you're saying, Rick.
Uh-oh. Bring it.
Come on. You ready? So you say that with this metaphor of adultery, the beauty behind it is that we can't miss is that it's rooted in marriage. Mm-hmm. And marriage is this picture of loving relationship. So my one issue is that marriage in the ancient Near East and within the context of the Old Testament is not a social relationship of either love or equality.
No.
And I think a lot of people miss this.
Contractual.
You'll hear a lot of people talk about biblical marriage.
Oh, yeah.
And I always find that really funny because
you don't really.
No, marriage in the Old Testament is nothing like marriage in modern society. This is not an arrangement of equals. Women in the ancient Near East and in ancient Israel have no choice in their marriage. They are given by their fathers. Oftentimes, this is done by the father for certain social and economic reasons, right? To like, we see this all throughout the ancient world with patrilineal kind of marriage structures. Sure. That this is a way of, hey, you're going to give me like 100 sheep and I'm going to give you my daughter in marriage. Right. So it's strengthening your position. So my difficulty is, given what we know about marriage in the ancient world, it's really challenging when marriage is used as a metaphor for God and God's people. An example, metaphors ultimately allow us to do certain things, right? Like they are just words, but they are what structure our reality. They are what prescribe, a certain action. And so in the ancient world, if Leviticus and Deuteronomy discuss this, if a woman is caught in adultery, she can be stoned. Yeah. Right. And this is how we get the story in John of them wanting to stone the adulterous woman. And of course, Jesus deals with that very differently, which is great. And we can talk about that. But that was the prescription within the society.
And there's no equivalent punishment for a male.
Yeah, not quite. There are punishments for males, but it is less strict.
Yes.
And it's a lot harder. And again, this says something about the society that this was written within. And so my point with saying all of this is my challenge with so much of what we've been reading through Kings and the prophets is that in the human community, there is an idea that if you do something wrong, aka dishonor your husband, because let's be clear, when a woman commits adultery, the problem there is that this is an honor and shame-based society. They've dishonored the name of the husband. We see that in Hosea here. This is actually what we get to in chapter 2 when the children are, pleading with the mother to stop doing this because they're making the name of the family look bad. She's making the name of the family look bad. So my point is the answer in the human community to adultery is violence. Yeah. Which means when we take that metaphor on a human level of marriage, or when we take that reality on a human level of marriage and the punishment when you've done wrong in the marriage covenant, and we make it metaphorical and we talk about our relationship with God, then the answer to Israel's disobedience is violence. Yeah. It's destruction. Now, granted, I came in today's podcast, I was like, I'm not going to go down this route, but here we are. I think
I'm glad you are.
This raises a really big question about biblical hermeneutics in general, how we interpret scripture, how we read these texts, especially the question for me, importantly, with all honor and deference to our Jewish brothers and sisters, is how do we read these texts as Christians? How do we read these texts as people that follow Jesus when Jesus says all of the law and the prophets hang on this command to love your neighbor? Yeah. what does that say about how we read something like Hosea? Paul says the same thing in Romans 13 about the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. So that's a really long conversation, and I don't want to sidetrack specifically discussing Hosea.
Well, let me just answer.
I was going to say, you can answer. I was just going to give an impression, like as I was going through this. I'm glad that Elliot brought this up, because there was a part of me that as I was going through this, I'm like, I don't like the way this feels, because it feels like this scorned lover who wants the person back, but was violent with them first, and is like, and then when you obey me again, I'll be nice to you again. I'm like, this feels like a toxic, abusive relationship.
Yeah.
So help me not feel that way.
So last thing, I'm glad you brought that up, because I just want to, that goes with my point about the reality and power of metaphors. Because I took a class in seminary. It was the pastoral care of violence, like how you deal with violence.
Wow.
And for anyone that wants to go pursue this topic further on Hosea and the prophets, there's a lot of women theologians who have written on how we deal with these. And one of the things they talk about is that we know statistically from data and case studies that in Christian communities, these metaphors can be used to subjugate women to that kind of abuse, to say that as long as the husband repents and wants to take you back. And then what we know is that often,
I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to. It's
right. Well, and what we know is that those cycles of abuse often use periods of kindness and periods of abuse to sustain the abusive relationship. So again,
because they're not always awful.
Exactly. They're not always awful, right?
It really had a large impression upon me when I was going through it, because that is what it felt like. And I did not like my impression of God in this. Now, there's things I'm missing. I'm not as well studied and haven't read everybody's different commentary on how we wrestle with this. So that's why we're here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really want to hear, Rick, your thoughts on this with marriage. One last, just because it's important to situate it historically, I wanted to say chapter 2, verse 6. Again, the way we might miss in the ancient context, marriage is a very different thing. So in chapter 2, verse 6, Hosea says, "Therefore I will hedge up her," Gomer, "hedge up her way with thorns, and I will build a wall against her so that she cannot find her paths." I mean, to be fair, this is quite literally a description of, I am going to kind of box you in.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't laugh. I mean, it's not funny. If it was in a modern context, it would be deeply troubling. But you almost have to laugh at the language of it here, where what Hosea is saying he's going to do to Gomer is to effectively kind of isolate her and keep her from going about and doing anything.
Yeah, and that isolationism is also very indicative of those abusive relationships.
Right, exactly.
Help us out here, Rick.
So,
sorry, we really laid it on you. We did not.
Rick's just sitting back like, wow, thanks.
He had this beautiful,
positive spin,
modern, loving thing in mind, and
let's go to Joel.
Went right to
What's Joel have to say? No, I'm just kidding.
Less than Hosea.
So
but,
I think everything that you both said is right on, and I think to wrestle with this text in the 21st century does raise all of the issues that you guys just brought to the table. And I'm not sure I have an answer to the 21st century interpretation of this, but remembering that it wasn't written in the 21st century and was written somewhere probably in the 8th century BC, there was a different understanding of what marriage was, and unfortunately it's not universal, but I would hope it's at least the majority opinion is that marriage is meant to be between two equal people, right? And I don't think that the metaphor of marriage being, the metaphor for marriage of being between the relationship between us and God works if we are both equal, because we are not equal to God. I think this metaphor only works in biblical days because husband and wife were not equal. If they understood marriage the same way we did, I don't think they could have used it.
Right.
And in the metaphor, God is the husband, and we, the believers, the church, the Israel is the spouse. There is a transactional aspect to ancient marriage, but they did know what love is. And I mean, we saw it when we read the Song of Solomon, right? Like
Yeah.
they had it in them to know what it is. We see it multiple times in the Old Testament and it's not always the man, but mostly the man. They see their beloved, at the well or in the field, and they are immediately attracted and they try and get together. They're not just looking for sheep in that moment to get a dowry and to bring families together. Sometimes that happens, but I'm not, I don't know exactly what was normative, but they knew what love could be. It was in there, even if it wasn't the common form of
primary
marriage.
way
Right.
in which that would have been arranged.
Right. And yes, the woman in adultery could, by Levitical law, be stoned. But we know that didn't always happen. I mean, we see that in the early pages of the New Testament when Mary has to go to Joseph and say, "I'm pregnant, but it's not yours, and it's from God," right? Like, and Joseph, of course, didn't believe her, and because no one would, and he could have had her stoned, but he decides to let her go quietly. I don't know if that was the normative, the primary way that you did it, but it was certainly within them to do that. So I think the ideas of marriage, what marriage was, how people worked through issues and problems, it's probably more complicated than we sometimes give them credit for.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking of some other examples where it's like, well, was that really as unequal as we're making it out to be? Like Abraham and Sarah, to some degree, doesn't feel, at least in the way that the story is told,
right?
As I think totally unequal.
Yeah, I think, that's the challenge: is what is the relationship of these biblical stories to actual on the ground social, ritual, contractual realities. That being said, we're not there. So all we have to go on is archaeological evidence, what scholars look at in those societies. And I think what they do show, and listen, I'm not casting any aspersions on ancient Israelite society. We know this of the majority of ancient societies. They were patrilineal, patrilocal. That being said, this is a tangent, the interesting point about biblical marriages, I think we actually tend to read quite a bit into those stories. Listen, I'm not denying that these people didn't know what love was. They were human beings, right? But like the question is, what were the social relationships at play in the society? I don't know. I think of is it Jacob that is at the well with Rachel? And that's a great point, Rick. That is one where it's like, there's definitely a more human component going on here.
Right.
But even still, so much of that story is bound up in property.
Sure.
It's Rebecca. Isaac sends somebody to go find a wife, and the servant is told that the woman who will offer him water, and Rebecca was at the well and offered him and his camel or whatever water.
Right.
But somebody else was at a well. I'm imagining.
There's so many.
There's so many wells, and then there was that woman at the well that Jesus talked to,
right.
And so
Genesis stories.
It's a type scene. Whenever a guy and a gal get together at a well, that there's love in the air.
Yeah.
Well, we read there's love in the air. Okay.
Love's in the air.
Someone's thinking 100 goats.
Jesus' disciples were all like worried when he was talking to that woman at the well in the New Testament.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, it's a complicated metaphor, no doubt. It is.
It is.
Yeah. The middle of chapter 11 in Hosea, this is one of those moments, and I know it's after all the violence and then before some more violence, and I get that. But God says, "How can I give you up, Ephraim," meaning Israel, "hand you over? How can I make you like Adamah, treat you like Zeboim? My spirit turns round within me. My comfort warms all at once." Like this is God in absolute heartbreak over the loss of Israel.
Right. Yeah.
And so I know it's a different tenderness than we would have written into it were this written in the 21st century, but I think for 8th century BC, that's about as tender of an image as you're going to get of God.
Yeah, I actually love even before that in verse 4, there is the imagery of God as the mother of Israel. God says to Israel, "I led them with cords of human kindness, with bands of love. I was to them like those who lift infants to their cheeks. I bent down to them and fed them.
Yeah.
So definitely, I mean, certainly, yeah, a very maternal.
One of the few really serious maternal images, metaphors for God
Yep.
in the Old Testament.
Right. What's so interesting is after both of these moments, Rick, of compassion, that imagery of my heart recoils within me, which you just read, is verse 9, where God says, I will not execute my fierce anger. I will not again destroy Ephraim, Israel. For I am God and no mortal, the Holy One in your midst, and I will not come in wrath. And I thought that was so interesting. The contrast there, it's almost admitting the way these metaphors break down, where it says, I am God, the Holy One. I am not a mortal.
Yeah.
And that almost really speaks to the way that these, to our whole marriage conversation, to even the imagery of God as a mother or God as a father or God as a husband, that these images ultimately, because they will always, by virtue of the reality of language, be rooted in human experiences, mortal experiences, they will always break down in describing the reality of God.
Peter Rollins is a philosopher and theologian, Northern Irish guy. And he does a whole thing about metaphor in God. And he says, God is a father, but not like I'm a father because, I'm not a perfect father. And God is like a spouse, but not like I'm a spouse because I'm not a perfect spouse. And God is a shepherd, but not like I'm a shepherd. God's a perfect shepherd. And so the metaphor always breaks down, and we can't take it too literally.
God is too great and too beyond anything that we know in the human realm for it to ever come close to what the reality is.
Which is why, and I realize I'm reading with a little rose-colored glasses. If I get it, if you take this book at 35,000 feet, the basic metaphor is that God wanted to be with us, loved us. We turned away, and his heart was broken.
We turned away, and our love failed.
I don't know the reference.
Isn't it in one of the Eucharistic prayers?
Not ringing a bell.
Yeah, it doesn't ring a bell for me. I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah,
Maybe it's something close to what's in Eucharistic Prayer C.
Maybe. I can't remember the rest of it. All I remember is that piece. So I'm not.
It sounds haunting.
Now I'm gonna.
Yeah. Wow.
Now I'm gonna need to look up one of the. I'm gonna have to look up the BCP.
That does.
And find that.
That's a problem in a room where there is absolutely nothing except a table. There's no books in here.
No books.
No,
books.
there's our Bibles, but that's not going to help me find the BCP. Although my phone is here and I can look up bcponline.org and see if I can look up the Eucharistic prayers. In the meantime, is there anything else we want to say about Hosea? Or are we ready to move on?
I'm ready to move on.
To Joel.
Yeah, I think we can move on.
All right, so Joel. Joel was a short one. Where are we? Let's locate us in history.
Well, that's the interesting thing about Joel is we have absolutely no idea.
Right. Where are we?
Don't know. There's some evidence that this might be like a post-exilic book. So after the Judahites were taken away to Babylon, there's some evidence that it's pre-exilic. And what linguists say when they look at the Hebrew of Joel is that it's not too old, but it's not too young. And so it's probably right in the middle of the biblical era, but we just don't know.
Yeah, for me, the one convincing thing within Joel itself, it's not a smoking gun, but it does seem to give some evidence that this was written in the post-exilic period, was chapter 3, verse 6. You have sold the people of Judah and Jerusalem to the Greeks, removing them far from their own border. So it would seem to indicate that this is happening after the destruction of Judah, and there's some recognition of Alexander the Great and the rise of the Greeks. Tough to say. It's really hard to say too, the compositional history, the editing history.
Right.
Was this section written earlier? Was this section written later?
We know nothing about Joel as a person.
Right. We're not even saying this the way we do with other books sometimes, where it's it says this, but it's really complicated to kind of figure out. Joel doesn't even say anything.
Right.
That's the key. Joel isn't take even Hosea, which we were just discussing. It literally starts by saying
Uzziah,
who was doing this under King Uzziah, King Jeroboam. The book intentionally
self-locates. Yeah.
Joel doesn't do that. It just says the word of the Lord that came to Joel, and then it just goes right into it.
Boom. Yep.
So one of probably the one thing Joel is remembered for is his use of the day of the Lord.
The day of the Lord. And speaking of, as we record this, we may be recording on the day of the Lord.
That's right.
Wait a minute. What?
Yeah.
It's September 23rd.
This could be the last episode of Cross Connections.
This is it.
Because
if it is, it's not even going to air.
Today, there's a bunch of people that are saying that today's the day Jesus comes back and we all get raptured.
Yep.
Well, if you're listening to this, you'll know for sure it didn't
right.
happen.
Well, here's the thing. There have been people throughout the last 200 years that have come up with dates and said, oh, this is the date, and then this is the date. And they have a 100% fail rate.
Yeah, right.
So my guess is this probably will air next Wednesday and everything will be okay.
I'm confident.
You're confident?
I am confident that this will.
That is a safe bet. That is a safe
It
bet.
really is. When someone says this is the day, you can pretty much say that's absolutely not going to be the day.
I'm pretty
And
sure
it's-
that Jesus said that. Isn't it like in
Yes,
Matthew
he
when
sure
Jesus
did.
says that nobody will know the day
Not
and the
even,
hour?
not even the Son, only the Father.
Not even Jesus knows.
Yep.
Some Yahoo in Kansas knows when the day, like it's
I think it was
So
South
here's,
Africa this time,
here's the
but-
irony, Rick. You said, oh, for the last 200 years, people have been doing this, which is absolutely true. But really, from the beginning, people have been doing this. I mean, part of what scholars will say is the reason Matthew includes this, which is in Matthew 24. You can go read it. This is Matthew's little apocalypse. It actually quotes Joel in Matthew 24.
Yep.
And part of what scholars will say is that Matthew included this section because even in Matthew's day, remember Matthew's written after the destruction of the temple, maybe around 100 CE, and people were saying like Jesus is going to come back like soon, like tomorrow.
Yep.
And this is part of Matthew is kind of anti-predictive in this sense. Like he goes so far as to say even Jesus does not, he puts those words in Jesus's mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of the ways that we can, we're talking about the New Testament here, but one of the ways we can date New Testament books is on how much they talk about the end.
Right.
Because the older they are, the more the Christian community was like, Jesus is coming back any second. He's coming back.
Yep.
He's coming back.
Mm-hmm.
And then as the years go on, that just gets a little less and a little less until you get the Gospel of John, which basically doesn't reference it at all.
Right.
Because people have been like, oh, okay, this must not have been something that's going to happen immediately.
We need to rethink this.
We need to rethink it. We misunderstood, and we just need to always be ready, but we don't need to worry about whether it's going to happen on September 23rd or not.
Well, so help me out here with the understanding of the exact picture of this, because I've never really thought about the way that we talk about Jesus is returning, the way that I've been raised as a Christian, as having anything to do, like I think about Jesus coming back and trying to set things right, but the way that I've heard rapture described specifically is like this weird random disappearance of people that they just like the snap that Thanos does, only without the dust from a Marvel film.
Right. And that's...
Sorry if I spoiled anything for anybody who hasn't watched
Endgame.
the Infinity series.
Those spoilers are
way
deadline's
past past the deadline for. So in my impression of the way I've heard rapture described is it's kind of like a Thanos snap, and suddenly all of these people just disappear out of their lives and are gone, and everybody else is left behind for 5 years trying to figure out what to do. And where does that come
that's
from?
why I said for the last 200 years, because this idea is a young idea. It's mid 1800s, and you might think, oh, that's really a long time ago. Christianity is a 2,000-year-old religion. Christianity and Judaism together are, 3,500-year-old religions. Like this is a new thing that was dreamed up by a guy named John Nelson Darby. Is that right?
That's
something like that.
Yeah.
That sounds like the name.
Darby. I know his last name's Darby, and
John Nelson Darby.
John, I got it. Wow.
Founder of the Exclusive Brethren.
And so historic, creedal, mainstream, mainline Christianity does not believe in a rapture. It just doesn't.
Because it's not in the Bible.
There are some bits of the scriptures that you can like pick out and be like, oh, there it is. But if you take the New Testament as a whole, It's not, for example, the book of Revelation that would also be quoted quite a bit about, the end times. There's no rapture. There's no people getting out of here. The kingdom of heaven comes here. It's not that humanity goes anywhere. The heavenly city of Jerusalem descends, and there's a new heaven and a new earth. The future isn't somewhere else. Future's here. So New Testament was not written to answer all of our theological questions. And so how exactly is this all going to happen? I don't know. And honestly, if anyone tells you that they know, run.
Right. Yeah.
Because there's 100% fail rate.
Yeah. Right. I think part of the challenge is a lot of this is rooted in the New Testament and Paul's writings. Part of this comes from 1 Thessalonians 4. So this is really jumping ahead, but it goes with Joel in the day of the Lord. In 1 Thessalonians 4, this is Paul's earliest letter, arguably. This is like 40 CE, depends which scholars you ask, but I do agree this is very early because like Rick said, you see a very early view of Paul's understanding of what will happen to believers when Christ returns. And so at the end of that chapter, Paul says, "For the Lord himself with a cry of command, with the archangel's call, and with the sound of God's trumpet will descend from heaven, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up in the clouds together with them to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will be with the Lord forever." So part of the challenge here is John Nelson Darby takes this, he translates the Bible, he creates this thing called the Scofield Reference Bible, and in it he develops this theology called dispensationalism, and he really takes like this verse and creates this entire theology out of it and some other areas in the New Testament. And it's like there are different dispensations, and there will be this thing called a tribulation, and there will be this thing called a rapture, and it really tries to kind of like systematize these things and make this like formula for this will happen, and then this will happen, and then this will happen. And this is where we get like end days prediction, like, oh, once we see this event happen, this is when all of these other events will happen.
Yeah, like a blood moon must mean
totally.
There's 2 blood moons this month or something like that. And that means that,
Now, interestingly, and we could do a whole podcast on this, I think part of what, and scholars of Paul will tell you this, and we have one coming on soon, though we will not probably be able to get into some of this nitty gritty stuff, is that Paul's own view on this develops really quite extensively over the course of his writings, right? So 1 Thessalonians is very early. When we get to something like 1 Corinthians, which comes a lot later, and you read 1 Corinthians 15 and Paul on the resurrection, this is not here anymore. This is really gone because Paul's theology is not some sort of abstract universal truths of information that has just been dumped into his brain by God. Paul, like the prophets, is wrestling with God's revelation in the midst of real pastoral contexts. Yep. And so part of, as Rick already mentioned, part of what happens is that as time goes on, they're rethinking how to understand what Jesus' return really means and how to articulate that. Yeah. There's a lot more we could say about that. But we're
still in the Old Testament, and we haven't gotten to the New Testament
yet. We're literally talking about Joel. But the last thing I'll say is go do some research on this. Yeah. Read some verses, read some scholarship on this. This is arguably one of the biggest debates in New Testament scholarship, is like how to understand the return of Jesus, how the New Testament understood the return of Jesus. You can go look up the parousia. And this is just the Greek word for return, P-A-R-O-U-S-I-A. This is one of really hotly debated topics.
And what's not hotly debated about it is that everything that's said about Jesus' return in the New Testament is based on the Old Testament concept of the day of the Lord.
Right.
And so that's what we find in the book of Joel.
And this is the first time we hear of it, right? The day of the Lord here in Joel. Or have we heard this before?
There might be a few references.
Yeah, I feel like in the major prophets we had it a couple times.
So you do see it in Isaiah and Ezekiel, it looks like.
That's what I thought. It did feel sort of familiar talking about a day of the Lord.
And I feel like we talked about it a little bit. It comes from the idea, remember, in Judaism and in the whole Old Testament, there's no concept of heaven and hell.
Right.
There's the concept of Sheol, this place, a holding pen where people die, and everyone, the good, the bad, the ugly, everyone goes to Sheol, or to the big holding pen. And then there will be a day of the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And on the day of the Lord, all the dead rise, and there is a great judgment. And the good people go off to something, although it's kind of unclear exactly what that is. But the evil, the wicked, the unrighteous cease existing.
Mm-hmm.
And, and we can talk about how the New Testament deals with that when we get to the New Testament.
Right.
And by the time we get to 1 Thessalonians and the book of Revelation, we'll see it a little bit more.
Right.
But the day of the Lord, while we find it in other places, like, it's the one thing that Joel is really known for. It's also liturgically, it is, if you ever find yourself in church on Ash Wednesday, Joel is the big Old Testament lesson.
Mm-hmm.
And it's right
Blow
from
the trumpet.
chapter 2, blow a horn in Zion, sound out on my sacred mountain. All the country's inhabitants are to tremble. Yahweh's day has come. It is near, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of cloud and murk. And then as it goes on, it's about, you assemble everybody. You bring in the kids, and you bring in the men and the women and the children, and you bring in the elderly, and everyone's to stand there and weep and wait. And so we also think
Sounds terrible.
Yeah.
I don't want to.
it's not a happy book.
Day of the Lord.
It's not a happy book.
Yeah.
2 non-happy books.
Mm-hmm.
It gets better.
It does get better.
It does
gets
get better.
better.
When scholars look at Joel, one of the things they see embedded into it, and I'd love to talk about this, is the idea of communal lament. That we come together to lament what we've done, lament what has done to us. It's kind of, because we don't know when it happened, but we don't know what the events are that precipitated this communal lament. Right. At the beginning, in the first chapter, there's these like locusts that come in. Was this written in remembrance of some great famine that came because locusts came in and ate all the crops? We don't know that. Was there a plague? Was there an invasion? Like, we don't exactly know, but something big happened. And the idea is, like, when something big happens, what we do is we come together, and together we lament, we cry out, we wait.
Yeah.
That, I think, is beautiful. The idea of lamenting together and coming together in these moments of great crisis, or following a great crisis.
When I was in seminary, we had a seminarian who transferred I was at Candler and Emory, Atlanta. And we had a student who transferred in from General Theological Seminary in New York City. And I think this was late fall 2001, 2 maybe. But the prior semester, he had been at General for the 9/11 attacks. And the bell, what he said was, the bells started ringing at the seminary. All classes stopped. Everyone went to the chapel. He said no one knew what was going on. Like, there weren't cell phones. Right. It wasn't, no one knew what was going on. They just went to the chapel, and the dean started leading the great litany from the prayer book, which is in sections a prayer of lament and communal, saying that we're sorry for the things that we have done. They still didn't know what was going on. They felt a subway rumble underneath of them, except there are no subways that run under General Theological Seminary. What they felt was one of the towers coming down. And whenever 9/11 comes around, I always, like, I wasn't there, but I feel like I was there because I heard JR's story.
Wow.
And like, that to me is like the picture of, we're going to come together in this tragic event. And what we're going to do is we're going to pray, and we're going to do it together.
I remember so many candlelit prayer vigils.
Yeah.
In the immediate aftermath of that. I remember just a lot of ways that people came together after that. And I'm thinking of other ways I've seen people come together in, prayer vigils and whatnot, in lament after
great tragedies,
many a school shooting or elsewhere.
Yep. And what we see in Joel is that that's not just a modern sensibility. It's part of being human.
So I think one thing I want to make sure we referenced with Joel, especially because when we turn to the New Testament, our first book we'll be reading will not be the Gospels, since we've done episodes on those. It will be Acts. After the Day of the Lord, or maybe perhaps tied with the Day of the Lord, I think the thing Joel is most known for is the quotation of Joel in Peter's sermon on the day of Pentecost. in Joel chapter 2, verse 28 and 29, after the day of the Lord, Yahweh says, I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams, and the young men shall see visions. Even on the male and female slaves in those days, I will pour out my spirit. And then this is quoted in Acts chapter 2 by Peter, as Peter is kind of retelling the history of Jesus and really the history of Israel and of God's relationship. So that's something for readers to be aware of, listeners to be aware of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, this is why we are soldiering through. I don't know if that's the best reference to use, but that is why we continue to march forward.
Faithfully
reading all of our Old Testament texts, because right here pops up a bit that our New Testament figures are aware of. This is the air they breathe, is this scripture. Right. And so they bring it up.
Yeah. When Peter experiences the day of Pentecost, he's like, oh, this is like exactly what Joel was talking about. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so he references it. And if he didn't know Joel, he wouldn't be able to reference it.
Right.
So.
Exactly. And now we know it too.
Yes.
One other note, in the midst of all of this judgment in Joel and Hosea, but specifically looking at Joel himself, much like Peter quotes Joel quotes Exodus. I don't know if you picked up on that. In Joel chapter 2, verse 13, there's been all of this stuff about the day of the Lord and how it's going to be a day of judgment. And it says, the transition is in 12, yet even now, says the Lord, return to me with all your heart. And when you get to verse 13, return to the Lord your God, for he is gracious and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, and relents from punishing.
I remember that part.
Yep, yeah. Exodus 34, the characteristics of God. So again, there is, and this ties right in with our Hosea episode, there is this conversation throughout the New Testament of how to talk about God, how to describe God, how to understand God's holiness, as well as God's compassion. So it's this constant conversation that's ongoing and continues right up into the New Testament.
Yeah. And is informed, just to think, Exodus, Joel, New Testament, Acts.
All woven together.
All woven together into a
tapestry.
Connected, cross-connected web.
All our cross connectors picked up on that, I'm sure.
If you didn't, I don't know how you didn't. Well, that's Hosea and Joel for us.
And so what are we doing next episode? What Amos?
A whole bunch of things. We've got Amos. We've got what comes after Amos? I think it's like 4. I think it's the next 4. So Amos.
Jonah. Oh, man.
Oh, yeah.
We could spend 8 hours in Jonah. Micah.
And then like Nahum or something like that. Yes, Nahum.
All right.
So we've got our reading cut out for us here, but I don't think we make it as far as Habakkuk.
It might be a 3-hour episode.
The
way we go through books.
It's possible. We do take a while. Mm-hmm. But some of them are on the shorter side.
I think for the rest of the minor prophets, we just have to do a minor prophets live stream. Like, have you seen how people will do these live streams for like 12 hours?
Oh, and just like wilt in our chair.
Yeah.
I'm not editing that.
Well, that's the thing. You don't edit it. It's just
it would just be live.
You don't edit
all the just stay in.
Yep.
Whew. None of this saying things that Natalie needs to cut out later.
Yep.
I mean, we could do our all day live at the 174th fair. It's coming up.
Yeah. As you are listening to this episode, it'll be that coming Saturday. Yeah, because this episode will release on October 1st.
But if we did that, everyone would be just around us listening instead
no
of
one would be at the fair
shopping or eating.
I don't think we'd be able to do that. There'd be too much other stuff going on. All the people, the dogs barking while they're getting their blessings, the 3-row back playing their great music. We can't.
The chickens clucking off in the distance.
Yeah, over that. The little train and its little bell going off. People shouting over like the best sale. Gotta come check this out. Mm-hmm. Do you want this piece of furniture?
The voice of St. David's, whoever that is this year.
Yeah, the voice of St. David's. So much great activity
it's so
that
good.
We wouldn't want to podcast over.
We would not want to podcast over that.
But the fair is in just a couple of days if you're listening to this as it releases.
And you didn't get raptured.
And you didn't get raptured. which I'm pretty confident you didn't. Not just you, but everyone. I'm not saying not
You're not
saying
casting
you were left
aspersions
behind
on-
either.
You're looking right
Nobody.
into Rick's soul on that one.
You're not going anywhere, buddy.
Oh, trust me, it's been a week. I'm not going anywhere either. So come and join us at the fair. We'll be there. There's going to be some stickers. There's going to be pet blessings. Anybody from 2 legs to 4 legs, come on out. We'll offer you a blessing. I mean, we'll even bless if you've got a pet tarantula with 6 legs or a pet snake with no legs.
I think Tanya would love to bless your tarantula.
Sure, why not? Just please bring it in a container so that it doesn't go missing. All right. That's all we got for you this week, folks. Lots of different little prophets next week. We'll see you there. Thank you for listening to this episode of Cross Connections Cover to Cover. New episodes drop each Wednesday. Please be sure to follow or like us on your favorite podcasting app to find us easily each week, or join us on our email list at stdavidschurch.org/crossconnections. If you have questions for us, you can call us at 484-588-5656 and leave a voicemail with your name, where you're from, and your question or comment. Please note, we may use your recorded voice in an upcoming episode of Cross Connections. If you like what you hear, we'd love if you would share this with your friends and rate us in Spotify and Apple Podcasts or whatever other app you're using so people can find us as well. Don't forget to visit our show notes for the year's reading list and any other resource links we've mentioned. Cross Connections is a ministry of St. David's Episcopal Church in Wayne, Pennsylvania. Season 2 Cover to Cover is hosted by
Rick Morley.
Elliot Van Hoy.
and Natalie Hill. Logo, graphic design, and podcast production by Natalie Hill. Stock media music provided by Marscott and Mood Mode Pond 5. You're welcome to learn more about all of St. David's worship and ministries at stdavidschurch.org. Tanya's going to bless him.
I'm not blessing the tarantulas.
I was like 2 legs to 4 legs as I'm imagining a friend's dog with only 3. And then I'm going, yeah, but people have other pets and things that are missing legs. And